They said the roots beneath the old magnolia could remember, that they could taste every drop of blood that had ever soaked into Mississippi soil, that they fed not on rainwater, but on memory, thick, black, and ancient. The tree stood behind the Hale plantation, half hidden in the mist, its branches twisted like fingers that had forgotten how to let go. No one sat beneath it after sundown. Not the children, not the field hands, not even the dogs. They said the air beneath that tree was too still, as though the world paused to listen for something buried deep beneath it. But that night, one woman went. Her name was Mariah. She was known for her silence, for the way her eyes carried the same weary gleam as the lamps that burned low in the servants' quarters. She moved like someone who had learned that sound could be dangerous, that even breath could betray you. Yet that night, when the moon hung thin and trembling above the cotton fields, she left her cabin barefoot, carrying only a small bundle wrapped in cloth. The bundle twitched. She stopped at the edge of the magnolia's shadow, her body shivering not from cold but from something older, something that waited for her. The scent of the tree was thick and damp, like rotting sweetness, like perfume that had been worn by the dead. She knelt and pressed her palm to the earth. It was warm. "I know you hear me," she whispered, her voice breaking like something unaccustomed to being used. "You've been waiting, haven't you?" The ground did not move. The wind did not stir. But the tree seemed to listen. She unwrapped the bundle. A small bird, dead but not stiff. Its eyes had been replaced with 2 white stones, smooth as milk. Around its neck was a lock of blonde hair tied in a knot. Mariah laid the bird beside the roots and whispered words that were not English, nor French, nor any tongue that could be written down. The kind of language that has no vowels, no grammar, only hunger. The earth answered. It was not a sound, not truly. It was a pressure, low, humming, like the vibration of a drum buried deep beneath her knees. The roots trembled. The ground seemed to breathe in. Then came a voice, not loud, not human, but remembering. "So many bones," it said, the sound forming inside her skull rather than her ears. "So many names beneath me. What name do you give to be taken in return?" Mariah bowed her head. "Not mine," she said. "Hers?" And she said the mistress's name, soft, careful, the way one might place poison in a glass of milk. The roots shifted, slow as an exhale. Something old turned over beneath the soil. "The one who breaks her own to make the world bow," the voice murmured. "Her tongue has touched the Lord's name in vain. Her shadow drips with pride. But the mind, oh, the mind is soft as pulp when you whisper long enough." Mariah's lips trembled. "Then whisper through me. For a moment, nothing. Then a pulse, a sharp, pulsing ache deep inside her skull, as though a hand had reached into her and twisted a thread that led straight to her heart." She gasped and fell forward, her fingers clawing the dirt. Beneath her, something slick and cold brushed against her wrist. The roots. They were moving. She did not scream. When she opened her eyes, the world had changed its shape. The air shimmered like a veil, and the magnolia seemed larger, breathing, swelling, alive in a way that trees should not be. The whisper came again, now closer, now inside her. 3 nights, 3 dreams, each one deeper than the last. "Her mind will rot from within, petal by petal. You will not speak of this to any soul that breathes, or your tongue will turn black in your mouth." Mariah rose, dizzy, her knees streaked with mud. The bird was gone. In its place was a shallow hollow in the ground, still wet, as though the earth had swallowed it whole. Behind her, the night pressed close. The wind moved for the first time in hours, and with it came the faintest sound of a woman crying. Not near, not far. Just below. She turned toward the house in the distance. The Hale mansion glimmered faintly in the dark, every window glowing like an eye that refused to blink. Her mistress was likely still awake, sitting at her dressing table, combing her golden hair. Mariah smiled, the first smile she'd allowed herself in years. "You'll hear me soon," she whispered. "You just won't know from where." The roots shifted once more like a sigh. A single magnolia petal fell at her feet, white as bone, glistening with dew that wasn't dew at all. When she picked it up, her fingers came away red. As she walked back toward the quarters, she did not notice the way the magnolia's lowest branch bent downward, as if bowing in reverence, mice, or hunger. Beneath it, the soil bulged and shuddered softly, as though something underneath was trying, very gently, to remember how to crawl, and in the wind that followed her home, faint but certain, came the echo of the same whisper that had answered her. 3 nights, Mariah. 3 dreams. Then she will forget her own name. The tree was silent again, but the earth still moved, just enough to make the field hum like a heartbeat beneath the soil, waiting for dawn that would never come. The jar began to rattle before dawn. It was a small sound, soft enough that any other soul might have mistaken it for the sighing of wood or a mouse caught in the straw. But Mariah knew the timbre of that sound, that faint, hollow clinking that no creature could make, the kind that came from something remembering the shape of what it used to be. The clay jar sat just beneath her pallet, wrapped in a strip of linen torn from the hem of her own dress. No one else dared to touch it. The others in the quarters pretended not to see it, or her. They crossed themselves when she passed, muttered prayers under their breath, whispered words that tasted like fear. By the time the sun rose pale and weak over the fields, the jar had gone still again. But Mariah could feel it, the quiet hum of something alive inside, waiting. The night before, her mistress had begun to twitch. At supper, the woman had dropped her fork 3 times, her hand trembling as though something beneath her skin was moving on its own. She'd called for the doctor, then sent him away without a word. Later, in her room, the candles refused to stay lit. The mirror over her vanity clouded with breath that wasn't hers. Mariah had watched from the doorway, head bowed. "Sleep sound, missus," she'd said softly. Sleep, real sound. Now in the dim morning she crouched beside the jar. Her fingers hovered over it, trembling. The clay was cold, colder than any morning air had a right to be. "You still with me?" she whispered. No answer came, only the faint scrape like a tooth dragged across stone. She unwrapped the linen. The jar was plain, unpainted, its mouth sealed with wax the color of dried blood. She pressed her thumb against the seal and felt a pulse beneath it. Slow, steady. Patient inside were things that once belonged to her mistress. A curl of golden hair, cut while the woman slept, braided around a thin silver ring that still smelled faintly of rose oil. A scrap of lace from her nightgown, a single pearl button plucked from her cuff, and then there was the thing that belonged to no one living. It looked like a tooth, though it was darker than bone, the color of storm water, of rot, of memory. When Mariah touched it, the air around her thickened and the jar began to breathe. "You took her mind yet?" she whispered. "You gnaw on it like you said you would?" The clay vibrated faintly, a low hum that tickled the roots of her teeth. "Not yet," a voice murmured thin and far away. 3 nights, child. The first dream is done. 2 remain." Mariah shuddered. She glanced toward the window, where dawn crept in sickly and pale, painting the boards in colorless light. Somewhere beyond the fields, the magnolia's branches swayed without wind. She pressed her forehead to the cool earth. "Don't let her wake peaceful," she said. "Don't let her think she's safe." The whisper inside the jar gave a sound like a smile. "Peace is for the buried," it said, "and she is not buried yet." That day, strange things began to crawl through the house. The servants whispered of their mistress calling out in her sleep, crying names that weren't her own. She'd risen from bed in the night, barefoot, and walked the length of the veranda, speaking to no one. Her hair tangled, her eyes open and white. The dogs had whined and clawed at the door to be let out. Mariah said nothing. She went about her chores, humming the same low melody she'd learned beneath the magnolia roots, the kind of tune that made shadows stretch longer than they should. By evening, her mistress's reflection began to change again. It was first seen by the maid who brushed her hair, a faint delay, a trick of the light. But soon the reflection began to move even when the mistress sat still, its lips whispering words that no one in the room could hear. The maid dropped the brush, screamed and ran. That night the house was locked tight. No one came near Mariah's door, and still the jar rattled. She woke to it in the darkness, and the sound, steady now, deliberate, as though something inside was counting. Each rattle matched the rhythm of her heartbeat, then grew faster, louder, more insistent, until it felt like the air itself was pulsing around her. She reached for the jar, hands shaking. "Tell me what to do," she whispered. "Feed me," it said. "With what?" "With her breath. The first she takes each morning, when she wakes and does not remember where she is. Catch it, bring it to me. Then you'll see her start to fall apart." Mariah's mouth went dry. The air in the room had turned heavy and wet, thick with the scent of iron and honey. She could hear something scratching faintly from inside the jar. Not claws, but something sharper, the sound of teeth against clay. She wrapped the jar back up, pressing the linen tight, whispering, "Tomorrow then. Tomorrow I'll bring it to you." But as she turned to lie down, she saw something at the corner of her pallet, a shape small and human, crouched low. It had eyes like polished glass and a mouth that opened too wide. It smiled, and when she blinked, it was gone, leaving only a small white tooth where it had crouched. She picked it up with trembling fingers, feeling the warmth of it, as though it had just fallen from a mouth still alive. The next morning, the mistress woke screaming. She claimed she could taste dirt on her tongue, that something had been whispering to her in her dreams, a voice soft and wet that asked to be let in. Her husband sent for a preacher. Maria, standing outside the door, smiled faintly. The jar beneath her apron twitched, eager. The preacher's prayers echoed through the halls long after he left. But when night fell, a second tooth rolled slowly across the floorboards of Maria's room, clicking softly as it came to rest beside the jar. It stopped moving. Then, very gently, began to rattle again. There are moments when the world forgets itself, when glass remembers what it once was before it learned to reflect. That morning, the mirror in the Hale parlour began to remember. The mistress sat before it, as she did every dawn, her silver comb catching the early light. The room was filled with the soft hush of fabric and the distant cry of a mourning dove. Everything was still, polite, civilized, except for the glass. The mirror had grown hungry. For days she'd noticed the faint delay, the smallest hesitation between her hand and its echo. At first she'd blamed exhaustion, the Mississippi heat, or perhaps the strange dreams that came now every night, dreams of roots pressing against her skull, of whispering voices beneath her feet, of a woman's shadow slipping through her walls. But this morning was worse. When she lifted her comb, her reflection stared back, unblinking. And when she smiled to test it, it did not move at all. Her breath caught. "Maria?" The name slipped out like a confession. She didn't know why she said it. The parlour door creaked open behind her. Maria entered quietly, hands folded. She had come to dust the room, to polish the mirror as she always did, though her eyes never rose to meet her mistress's. "Bring the oil," the mistress said. "This thing's gone dull." "Look at it. It hardly shines." Maria moved closer, her steps deliberate. "It shines enough," she murmured. "What was that?" Maria only shook her head and began to wipe the glass, her rag moving in slow circles. With each stroke, the surface grew clearer, brighter, and colder. The mistress's reflection sharpened until it looked almost alive. Almost too alive. The eyes glistened with a kind of wetness that glass should not have. Maria paused, her hand hovering. "It's watching you," she whispered. The mistress laughed, too loud, too brittle. "Your superstitious nonsense again. It's a mirror, not a mouth." But the reflection's lips twitched. It was small, fleeting, but both women saw it. The mistress froze, the comb slipping from her fingers. The sound of it hitting the floor was sharp enough to split the silence in two. Maria backed away, eyes downcast. "You best not look at it too long, missus," she said. "Glass remembers what you put in it. Sometimes it gives it back, changed." "Changed?" The mistress's voice trembled. Maria did not answer. She gathered her things and slipped out, leaving her alone with the mirror and the echo that no longer belonged to her. The mistress turned back to the glass. Her reflection smiled. It was subtle, a flicker of teeth, a whisper of lips. But the smile stayed even as she frowned, even as she rose from her chair and backed away. "Stop this," she whispered. "You're just tired." But the reflection leaned forward, closer than she had moved, its face pressing against the inside of the glass as if the barrier between them were softening. "Not tired," it said. "Remembering." The voice was hers, yet wrong, breathless, wetter, full of roots and soil. She stumbled back, clutching the edge of the vanity. The candles wavered, guttered, then went out. Darkness settled heavy as sleep. Only the mirror glowed faintly, as if lit from within, and then, just for a moment, she saw someone standing behind her reflection, a dark shape, a woman's silhouette, head bowed, whispering words she couldn't hear. The figure reached out and the reflection's hand followed, pressing against the inside of the glass until the surface rippled like water. The mistress screamed and threw her chair backward, the sound ringing through the parlour like a bell struck by lightning. The mirror went still. The next morning, the servants found her sitting in the same spot, pale and shaking, staring into the glass. Her hair was tangled, her eyes hollow. When asked what she'd seen, she only said, "She smiled before I did." From that day on, the reflection began to lead. When she turned her head, it moved first. When she blinked, it blinked slower, as if savoring the motion. She stopped brushing her hair altogether, too afraid to meet its gaze. But she could feel it watching, even when she looked away, even when she slept. One night she covered the mirror with a sheet. The next morning the sheet was gone, folded neatly at her feet, and in the glass her reflection's lips were still moving, murmuring something soundless, a rhythm that matched the whisper of the magnolia trees outside. By the 7th day she no longer slept. Her husband had gone to town, leaving her alone in the great empty house. Maria brought her tea and found her sitting once more before the mirror, eyes wide, pupils blown dark as tar. "Mrs.," Maria said softly, "you look in poorly. You ought to rest." The mistress didn't turn. Her voice came slow, distant. "It's not me in there anymore." Maria glanced at the mirror and felt her stomach twist. The reflection was smiling, but the mistress was not. "She likes my face," the mistress whispered. "She says it suits her better than mine ever did." Maria set down the tray and stepped back. The air around the mirror shimmered, as though heat were rising from beneath the floorboards. "You shouldn't keep staring," Maria said. "Glass can turn inside out if you let it." The mistress gave a slow, broken laugh. "Perhaps it already has." The reflection lifted its hand and pressed it to the inside of the glass. A faint mark bloomed there, the print of a palm. Too pale, too perfect. And then, as the clock struck noon, it smiled first. Not the kind of smile that comes from joy, but the kind that knows a secret it's about to share. The surface of the glass rippled once, twice, then stilled, trapping that terrible smile forever. Maria felt something in the air break, a thin thread snapping. She turned to leave, but as she reached the doorway, a sound followed her. The soft scrape of a comb through hair, though no one had moved. When she looked back, the chair was empty. But in the mirror, the mistress was still sitting there. Her reflection had not followed her out, and when night came and the lamps were lit, her husband returned home to find the mirror uncovered, shining brightly, and in its depth 2 women seated side by side. One breathing, one not, both smiling. At dusk, the crows gathered on the fence and went silent. Even they knew the words she hummed were not meant for daylight. The wind was thick that evening, a slow, sticky kind of air that clung to the throat and made every breath feel like a trespass. The swamp behind the field shimmered like dark glass, the last gold of the sun sinking into its skin, and somewhere between the hiss of the insects and the slow drip of moss water, a tune began to curl through the heat, low, uneven and wrong. They said it started with Eliza May, the woman who sang to no one and everything at once. She'd been brought to the plantation from New Orleans after the mistress's last girl disappeared, though no one spoke of that, not in words that carried beyond the candlelight. The mistress, young and pale with eyes that flinched at thunder, had called her a blessing at first. "She's quiet," she'd said, "and she prays." But there was no prayer in what Eliza hummed when she swept the back porch at twilight. It wasn't music made for human mouths. The rhythm bent backward, like something crawling on its hands. The notes seemed to twist the air, and even the dog stopped barking when she began. One night, the master found black feathers inside the mistress's shoes, damp and smelling faintly of salt water. The next morning, his wife couldn't remember his name. She laughed instead, a soft, childlike sound, and asked who had painted the walls with shadows. By the 2nd week, the servants whispered that Eliza May had made a doll, sewn from the mistress's nightgown and packed with river mud. No one saw it, but the sound of tiny beads clinking in a jar was heard from her quarters after midnight. And the crows, once noisy, gluttonous things, now perched around her window in still, watching silence, like sentinels waiting for the world to end. "Don't hum that here," one of the older women warned her. "Crows don't sing for the living." Eliza only smiled. "Then maybe they'll sing for the dying," she said, and kept humming. The mistress's mind unraveled thread by thread. She would stare at her reflection for hours, whispering to the glass until her lips bled. She began to forget what day it was, then where she was, then who she was. By the time the doctor came from Jackson, She was singing back the same crooked tune that Eliza hummed, but slower, broken as if through cracked teeth at night. Her laughter floated down the halls, soft as the wings of something just born. The master barred her room, nailed the windows shut, and forbade Eliza May from entering the house, but by then, the house itself had started to change. The walls sweated, the floors sighed, the portraits warped, and each morning more crows gathered, lining the fence like black punctuation marks against a sentence no one dared to finish. The preacher came with his Bible and a trembling hand. He sprinkled holy water that steamed where it fell. "There's rot in her," he muttered. "Rot of the spirit." But when he opened his mouth to pray, a crow flew into the room through the chimney, landed on the mistress's chest and began to peck and slow, methodical as if counting. The next morning, Eliza May's quarters were empty. Her bed untouched, her window open, the jar gone. Only a circle of salt remained on the floor, unbroken, and a faint trail of feathers leading toward the swamp. Days later, the mistress's body was found in her locked room. Her eyes were gone, and her lips were stretched in a smile that had no peace. The doctor said it looked like she'd been trying to hum when she died. And still the crows did not sing. They only watched, heads tilted, as though waiting for something to return from beneath the house. When the new mistress arrived months later, she swore she could hear humming from the walls, and sometimes, late at dusk when the wind turned warm and heavy again, the crows gathered on the fence and every sound in the field went quiet. Only then, faint, almost kind, what came a woman's voice, humming the song the crows wouldn't sing. And the swamp in reply began to breathe. They slept in different rooms, but woke gasping from the same visions. The line between them was no longer of power and servitude. It was of spirit and sickness. By then, the house had begun to breathe, slow and heavy like an animal in its sleep. The air hung with a damp sweetness, perfume mixed with decay, and the sound of rain against the shutters felt like whispering fingers. Outside, the swamp pressed close, swollen with mist and fever, but it was what lived inside that no one could name anymore. The mistress no longer screamed when the dreams came. She only stared, pale and trembling, as if trying to remember which body she belonged to. Her nights were not hers, not fully, for in her sleep she saw through another's eyes, brown, glistening eyes framed by candlelight and river smoke. The visions began soft, hands weaving string, a bowl of dark water, the faint hum of a song she could almost understand. But then came the faces, wrong, shifting, reflected, until she woke with mud beneath her nails and her own name whispering back at her from the mirror. In the quarters, Eliza May woke the same way, gasping, her palms slick, as though she'd been holding something that had melted. She'd sit upright, trembling, watching the flame of her lantern quiver though the air was still. "She's inside my head," she'd whisper, though no one was near enough to hear. "She's dreaming through me." And so each night they met, and not in flesh, but in the dark place between waking and death. A room that smelled of lilies and smoke, walls made of breath and heartbeat. The mistress would stand barefoot on black water, and Eliza May would appear behind her, holding a thread, red as a wound, thin as a promise. "Why you hum my song?" Eliza would ask, voice calm, eyes wet. "I don't know," the mistress whispered. "It's yours." "Not mine." But the thread between them pulsed, binding their hands as though something had chosen for them. Each morning they awoke weaker, the mistress's skin yellowed. Her hair fell like dry grass. Eliza's eyes grew shadowed, her voice cracked on the hymns. And in the night, the crows began to tap at both their windows, not pecking, not pleading, only tapping. A slow, patient beat that matched the rhythm of the thread itself. The doctor said it was fever, the preacher said it was sin, but neither could name the smell that clung to the curtains. A mix of salt, smoke, and something older, like old wood that remembered screams. Even the slaves whispered less now, for the house had learned to listen. One dusk, the mistress woke to find the thread in her hand, real, tangible, sticky with something dark. It stretched across the room, vanishing beneath the door. When she followed it, barefoot and shaking, it led her down the hall, past portraits whose eyes had turned to follow her, down to the cellar door that breathed cold when opened. Eliza was already there, standing barefoot in a circle of salt, her eyes rolled white, her mouth moving in a language that came from before the fields, before the chains, before even the swamps had names. The thread glowed faintly between them, swaying as though alive. "You shouldn't be here," Eliza murmured. "It's you," the mistress gasped. "You've done this," Eliza smiled, not cruelly, not kindly. "No, it's us, can't you see? You dream through me, I burn through you." The floor began to tremble. Dust falling from the beams, the air thickening like honey. From beneath the house came the sound of water running, though there was no river for miles. The crows outside began to scream, hundreds of them, their bodies beating against the glass until the windows cracked. The mistress fell to her knees, clutching her head. "Stop, please stop." But the thread would not let go. It pulled tighter, digging into her flesh, glowing hotter until the room was all light and shadow and ash, then silence when dawn came. The master found both women unconscious, the mistress on the cellar floor, Eliza in her quarters, their hands blistered in the same shape, as though they'd been holding fire together. For the next 7 days, neither spoke. The mistress stared through her meals, eyes unfocused, lips moving as if repeating something unheard. Eliza hummed softly, slower now, her song broken and incomplete, and on the 8th night, both rose from their beds at the same hour, walked to their windows and whispered perfectly together the same words, words that made the crows fall silent, words that made the house exhale a breath it had held for too long. Downstairs, the master woke to find the lamps burning without oil, and a red thread tied to the door handle, leading out into the fog-drowned fields. No one ever saw where it ended, but every night after, the dreams spread to the cook, the field boys, the master himself, and by the time the rains came, the whole house was dreaming the same dream, a song with no end, and 2 women standing hand in hand, their eyes open, their mouths moving as the thread between their dreams began to hum. There was a sweetness in the house that did not belong. It came after midnight, drifting through the shutters like perfume from a graveyard, heavy, slow, and patient. The scent of honey, soft, golden, sickly, twined itself with something sharper, the faint copper tang of blood. Together they filled every breath, and by dawn, even the candles burned slower for it. The mistress had taken to praying before sunrise, her voice low and cracked from sleepless nights. She knelt before the Virgin statue in the parlor, whispering half hymns, half pleas, but somewhere between each amen, a laugh began to echo, faint at first, then clearer. A woman's laugh, soft, knowing, cruel in its calm. At first she thought it memory, the echo of a slave's song that had drifted up from the quarters years ago. But the sound came from inside the walls, and it answered her prayers before she could finish them. "Lord, deliver me from laughter. Forgive me for laughter," until one night she stopped praying altogether and simply listened. The house had begun to rot from its corners, not visibly, not yet, but in a way that could be felt. The velvet curtains drooped heavier, the portraits seemed slick with humidity, and the floorboards wept dark stains that never dried. When she walked through the hall, the scent followed her, that sweetness, that strange honey warmth that wasn't comfort, but corruption, as though the air itself were turning to syrup. Slow and clinging, she began to find flies, tiny, golden-backed things buzzing in clusters on the windowsills, their wings sticking to the glass like damp lace, and one evening when she brushed them aside, her fingers came away sticky, a faint yellow residue that shimmered like nectar. In the quarters, Eliza May stirred her cauldron slower these days. The others said she'd stopped eating, stopped speaking much at all, and when she did speak, her voice carried the tone of someone listening rather than talking. "She's praying wrong," Eliza murmured one night, stirring her pot with a bone-handled spoon. "There ain't no God in them words no more." The other women crossed themselves and looked away, but the fire beneath the pot flickered blue, and when Eliza looked into it, she swore she saw the mistress's face, eyes open, smiling through the smoke. The next morning, the mistress found her rosary fused to her hand. The beads melted slightly as though warmed from within, and where each bead had touched her skin, a small welt had formed, round, pink, sticky with a thin layer of honey. Her maid screamed when she tried to wash it off, for the welts bled not red but gold, and the scent filled the room until everyone grew dizzy. The preacher was summoned from the next parish. A tall man with pale eyes and hands too soft for the work of salvation, he entered with his Bible, left with it soaked through, for as he read his verses, the candles leaned toward him, the wax sliding upward instead of down, and when he reached for the mistress's forehead, his fingers came away shining, as if he had touched not flesh but honeycomb that night. The mistress dreamed of the magnolia tree again, its roots slick with blood, its blossoms dripping amber, and beneath it, barefoot, calm, humming softly, was Eliza May. She was weaving something from strands of hair and twine, and in her lap sat a jar, filled to the brim with something golden, something that moved, when the mistress tried to speak. Her mouth filled with sweetness. Thick and choking, she woke gasping, the taste still on her tongue, and found her pillow crawling with ants. For 3 nights she locked herself in her room, praying without voice, only breath. But the laughter didn't stop. It followed her now behind her shoulder, sometimes slipping from her own throat, before she realized it was hers. The servants heard it too, that light, lilting sound echoing through the hall even when she was asleep, and they began to leave one by one, crossing the fields at dusk, whispering that the mistress had caught the devil's sweetness, that she was being fed to something, slow and deliberate, like a fruit left too long on the branch. By the 7th night the walls began to seep, a dark golden fluid trickling from the corners, thick and gleaming, and the house smelled not of death, but of ripening, the sweet unbearable rot of something overripe. The mistress dragged herself down the hall, calling for Eliza, her voice thick and slurred, her lips glistening as though she'd been drinking syrup. "Eliza, what have you done to me?" she whispered, and from the far end of the corridor came a reply, soft and steady. "Just giving back what you took, miss, piece by piece." The mistress fell to her knees, hands sinking into the honey pooling on the floor. Her reflection stared back from the golden sheen, but it wasn't hers. Not anymore. The face in the reflection smiled first, then opened its mouth, and something laughed from beneath the surface. By dawn the house was empty, no servants, no master, no sound but the buzz of flies thick enough to hide the windows. And in the parlor, where the Virgin once stood, a new figure glistened in the dim light, shaped like a woman, but carved of amber inside its chest, faintly visible. Something pulsed, slow and red, like a heart trying to remember its rhythm. And above it, carved into the wall by an unseen hand, were words no one could read. But if you listened close enough, you could hear the laughter, still soft, still sweet, rising and falling like a prayer said wrong, in a house that smelled of iron and honey. The sickness began in whispers, and the whispers began beneath her bed, where the dust never gathered, where no servant dared to sweep, as if something invisible had marked the boards as its own. The mistress woke before dawn that morning, her body drenched in cold sweat, her dream still clinging to her skin like wet lace, and when she turned her head she felt it, a weight beneath her pillow, soft yet alive like the warmth of another's breath. When she reached under it, her fingers brushed something smooth, something plaited, and when she pulled it free, her hand trembled. It was a braid, thick, black, and glistening as though it had been freshly cut, still damp with the oil of a living scalp, and at its frayed end, a thread of crimson tied tight as a curse. For a long while she only stared, the candlelight trembling across her cheekbones, her lips parting but no sound escaping, because she knew that braid. She had seen it swinging down the back of the woman who worked the kitchen fire, Eliza May, the same woman, whose voice she swore she now heard humming from the corner of her room. The sound was faint, barely human, a lullaby turned inward, and the air began to taste like iron. Sweet, metallic and wrong. The mistress rose too quickly, her knees buckling beneath her, and when she tried to call for her maid, the words came out thick, garbled, as though her tongue had grown heavy, foreign in her own mouth. By sunrise her speech had changed, slow, dragging, a strange rhythm weaving through her words, and the house servants whispered that her voice now sounded borrowed, as though she were trying to speak through someone else's mouth. "She's speaking crossways," one woman said. "Like 2 voices wrestling for one throat," said another, but no one dared look too long at her, for every time the mistress turned her gaze, the air rippled faintly, and the smell of river mud filled the hall. The master called for a doctor, but by the time the man arrived, the mistress had taken to sitting upright in her chair, a black veil covering her hair though it was not Sunday, her lips moving in silence, her eyes following something that wasn't there. He pressed a stethoscope to her chest and drew back, pale. "There's another sound," he whispered, something breathing back behind her heartbeat. That night, she tore open every drawer, pulled linens, dresses, and combs to the floor, searching, though she could not have said for what. her hands trembling, her tongue thick, and when she opened the drawer beneath her vanity, another braid lay waiting, smaller, paler, twined with a ribbon she recognized from her own childhood. She screamed then, a sound not hers but a chorus, dozens of voices rising from the walls, echoing through the wood like wind caught in a hollow tree. In the quarters, Eliza May woke at the same moment, her eyes snapping open, the fire in her hearth flaring without touch. She lifted her head slowly, and a single tear of blood rolled down her cheek. "Lord forgive me," she murmured, though she knew he would not. Ere dawn started, the next day no one entered the mistress's room, for from behind the locked door came the sound of combs dragging through hair that no longer existed, and the smell of hot iron and singed flesh. The maid who listened at the keyhole swore she saw something moving, a shadow, long and thin, rising and falling like a serpent coiling through silk sheets. By the third day the mistress could no longer form words at all, only low hums, mimicking Eliza's old work songs, and her hair, once golden, once proud, began to fall in ropes, clumping in her lap like discarded vines. The master demanded Eliza be brought to him, but she was gone, her bed empty. A faint line of black ash marking the doorframe, and a single braid pinned to the wall with a sewing needle, as though left as a signature. That night, thunder rolled across the delta, the rain slanting sideways like claws, and somewhere between each flash of lightning, the mistress could feel her scalp crawling, something moving beneath it, slow, deliberate, threading from root to root. When she reached up in panic, her fingers met hair that was no longer hers, thicker, darker, coarse as riverweed, and when she pulled, the pain ran deep, not on her head. But behind her eyes, in the mirror, her reflection lagged again, a heartbeat too slow, and when it caught up, it smiled before she did, mouth wide, tongue blackened, and on its pillow lay a new braid, still smoking at the ends by dawn. The room smelled of burned wax and rain, and the master found her sitting upright, her lips stitched with hair, thin, black and tight, her head bowed as though in prayer, yet her eyes wide open, watching the floor where something small twitched, a braid moving faintly, dragging itself across the boards like a worm seeking its grave. And when the master leaned closer, trembling, he heard it, a faint hum, the same tune Eliza used to sing while washing blood from her hands. In the hall outside, the portrait's eyes had begun to dull, and every pillow in the house, every single one, hid beneath it a coil of hair, warm, living, breathing by evening. Even the crows refused to land on the roof, and the wind that passed through the magnolia trees sounded like women laughing through clenched teeth. In the master's sleep that night, he dreamed of his wife's braid tightening around his throat, and in that dream, he heard Eliza whisper from the dark, "Don't pull. She only want what was hers." When he woke, the scent of iron and honey still clung to the air, and under his pillow something shifted, soft, wet and still warm. The first sound that night was not thunder nor wind, but the tolling of the chapel bell and backward. Each peal rolled through the valley like the groan of something ancient being dragged from sleep. 12 strikes, then 11, then 10, counting down instead of up, as though the hour itself were unraveling, as though time had decided to walk back into its own grave. In her bed, the mistress stirred. Her breath came shallow, her eyes fluttering, her lips parting around a name she should not have known. It slipped from her throat like a confession wrung from the dead. "Eliza May!" The sound of it rippled through the room, not loud but final. The name hung there, trembling, as if the air itself recoiled from the weight of its truth. And in the quarters beyond the cane fields, Eliza May woke, her eyes snapping open, her pulse already racing. She knew the bells were not meant for God. They were meant for her. The night had gone strange. No frogs, no crickets, no wings beating in the dark, only the backward bell and the hum of a world holding its breath. The moon had vanished entirely, leaving the sky a bruised, pulsing black. Even the magnolia trees seemed to lean inward, their petals trembling as if listening. Inside the great house, every clock had stopped. The air was thick with the scent of rain that would never fall, metal and salt and smoke. The mistress sat upright, her eyes wide, her fingers tracing invisible symbols in the sheets. Her lips moved soundlessly until at last they found their rhythm again. "Eliza May," she whispered once more, the syllables slurred but sure this time, as though the name itself was a key, turning in a lock long rusted shut. Down in the quarters, Eliza lit a single candle. The flame sputtered, unwilling to stand straight, bending toward the sound of the backward tolls. Her shadow moved against the wall like a body underwater, slow, distorted, uncertain if it belonged to her. "Lord," she murmured, her voice shaking, "you told me this day'd come." She took a deep breath, reached beneath her cot, and drew out the clay jar. Inside, something rattled softly. Teeth, bone, a small twist of hair that smelled of rain and smoke. She pressed her thumb against the lid, and it began to hum. The first of the bell's reversed tolls reached one, then silence. The air itself seemed to pause, waiting, expecting, dreading. The mistress rose from her bed. Her nightgown clung to her skin, damp with the fever of what wasn't sleep. Barefoot, she drifted down the hall, her movements gentle, deliberate, as though she were being guided by a hand unseen. She passed portraits that had long since faded, yet in the flicker of the candlelight the faces turned. The eyes followed her, not in judgment, but in recognition. In the parlor the fire had died, yet the room pulsed with warmth, the kind of warmth that comes from breath, from bodies close but invisible. She went to the window, and through the glass saw the chapel across the field, its door ajar, the bell tower looming like a blackened tooth against the sky. It swayed though the air was still, and with each backward peal she felt something tug at the base of her skull, like a string being wound tighter and tighter around her spine. Eliza May stepped out into the yard, candle in hand. The earth beneath her feet was wet but not with rain. It shimmered faintly, slick and red where moonlight should have fallen. She walked toward the sound, her heart thudding in her throat. When she reached the chapel door, she saw it. The mistress standing in the aisle, her head tilted back, her hair falling loose, her mouth open as though drinking the silence itself. "Eliza May," the mistress breathed again, her voice echoing strange, doubled. Not hers alone. Her eyes rolled white, her hands trembling as though unseen fingers were guiding them. "I remember now," she whispered. "Your name was never meant to die." Eliza stepped closer, clutching the clay jar to her chest. "Don't speak it again," she hissed, but the mistress smiled, slow and broken. "You made me remember." The bell tolled once more, backward, a deep, wet sound that seemed to come from underground. The chapel candles flared, then bent inward, their flames bowing low, and from the rafters came a low rustle, not birds, but the sound of something soft dragging across wood. Eliza felt her knees weaken. "It ain't supposed to ring that way," she said under her breath, but even as she spoke the bell struck 0. A sound tore through the chapel, not a crash, not a scream, but a gasp. The sound of air being drawn in by something that had not breathed for years. The walls pulsed once, the wood swelling like skin. And then silence. The mistress's body went still. Her eyes fixed on Eliza, wide and lucid for the first time in months. But her mouth was still moving, shaping words that belonged to neither of them. From the corners of her lips, thin rivulets of soil began to leak, dark, wet, glistening. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. "It's singing for you." The bell above began to sway again, faster now, forward and backward both, the metal groaning under some unseen strain. Eliza dropped the jar. It shattered on the chapel floor, and from its shards rose a sound, like humming, low and human. 1,000 voices bound into one long, unbroken moan. The shards quivered, pieces drawing together, forming something wet, something shaped like a hand. The mistress reached toward it. "Eliza May," she said again, but her tone had changed, and a question now, pleading, trembling. And in that moment, Eliza saw her for what she was. Not the woman who owned her, but the vessel she had made, the body the curse had chosen to remember itself through. The floor shuddered. Every window in the chapel cracked at once. Outside, the magnolia trees bent backward, their blossoms turning black in the absence of light. And from the rafters, the bell rope uncoiled on its own, descending slowly like a noose made of shadow. Eliza fell to her knees. "Stop," she whispered. "It's done, the debt's paid." But the mistress smiled through the soil on her teeth. "Then why," she said softly, "is it still ringing?" The bell struck once more, but this time the sound did not echo. It sank. Down through the floorboards, through the graves beneath the chapel, until it reached something that had been waiting far longer than either of them. The candlelight dimmed. The bell rope twitched, and the mistress's body lifted gently from the floor, her feet hovering an inch above the ground. Her eyes turned to Eliza, wide and black as the space between heartbeats. And when she spoke again, her voice was not hers, nor Eliza's. It was both. "We're not done." Then the bell began to ring forward again. Slow, deliberate tolling one, and every grave in the field outside shifted once beneath the soil. The basin was porcelain once, white as milk and smooth as a child's skin, but time had bruised it yellow, veined with the faintest threads of rust, like something sick trying to bloom beneath the surface. The mistress had insisted it be kept spotless, yet that morning, when she bent to wash her face, the water didn't ripple like water should. It held, heavy and still, like the top of a grave that refused to settle. The candlelight trembled on the wall but never touched the surface. Her breath fogged the mirror above, and the air smelled faintly of copper, as not blood. Not yet, but something that remembered it. And when she dipped her hands into the bowl, the warmth startled her. It wasn't the chill of morning water. It was the slow, steady warmth of something living. Her palms broke the surface and the basin blinked. She froze. The water did not splash or move, but two eyes opened beneath it, not hers. Not any human's. They were too wide, too knowing, and too patient. The whites were tinted grey, the irises dark as river mud, and when they shifted, she felt something inside her chest turn like a key in a lock that was never meant to open. She stepped back, hand pressed to her mouth. The maid, the same one who had once sung to the magnolia tree, stood in the doorway. Her shadow long and still. "You shouldn't look too long," she whispered, her voice like silk drawn through teeth. "Why?" The mistress stammered, her throat tight. The maid tilted her head. "Because it looks back outside." The crows that had once avoided the house began to gather again, perching along the eaves, silent, watching. The sound of dripping came from the basin, though no water spilled. Just the slow, rhythmic tick of something breathing beneath the porcelain. That night, the mistress dreamed of standing waist-deep in a flooded field. Moonlight shimmered across the water, but every reflection was wrong. The trees leaned the other way, the stars pulsed backward, and from beneath the surface, hundreds of faces looked up. Some she knew, servants, guests, even the old pastor who vanished one winter, and one face that smiled just a moment too late. Her she woke before dawn. The maid was already in the room, folding the sheets, humming something low, the same tune the crows had refused to mimic weeks before. On the dresser, the wash basin gleamed faintly in the dim light. The water was gone, but at the bottom of the bowl lay two pale crescents, eyelids, soft and thin as parchment, pressed together like wilted petals. "What is happening here?" the mistress whispered, her voice almost gone. The maid did not answer, only turned her head slightly and said, "You've been seen, miss, and once seen. It remembers." For 3 nights she refused to touch the basin, covering it with a linen cloth, but each morning when she returned, the cloth was damp, and the faint outline of 2 eyes had bloomed through the fabric, ringed in rust-red stains. Her prayers became shorter, more desperate. The sweetness that once clung to her halls, that scent of honey and warm wax, now curdled into something metallic. When she lit candles, their flames leaned away from her reflection, bending toward the dark corners of the room. By the 4th night she could no longer sleep. She sat before the basin, veil drawn tight around her face, and whispered to it. "You can't have me," she said, "you can't." But the surface quivered, and beneath it came a sound, not words, but the echo of laughter, familiar, strained, like her own voice played backward through hollow lungs. The maid's footsteps creaked in the hallway. She did not enter, but her voice slipped under the door like smoke. "You asked it to show you truth, miss, and truth don't come empty." The mistress gripped the basin's rim, her nails biting into porcelain. She felt the pull, and soft at first, then harder, as though the water wanted her pulse. Her memory, her name, her reflection rippled, splitting, one side still her, the other smiling too wide, too patient. And when she tried to look away, the water rose, not spilled, not poured, rose, as though invisible hands were lifting it to her face. The first drop touched her cheek. It was warm, not like water at all, but like skin. Then another sliding into her mouth, thick and tasting faintly of iron and something sweeter. "Honey?" Perhaps she screamed, but the sound gurgled, half-drowned. And from the other room, the maid whispered her name, the true one, the one buried beneath the magnolia tree. By morning, the wash basin was empty again. The maid entered quietly, set down fresh towels, and did not look at the bed. She dipped her hands into the basin, and the water, though clear, shivered with a faint reflection. For a moment, two faces stared up from beneath, one old, one new, and then only hers, calm and obedient, remained outside. The first crow cawed, not a warning, but a mimicry, the same sound the mistress had made when the water closed over her mouth. And deep in the basin, unseen beneath the surface, two eyes blinked, once slowly, as though waiting for the next face to lean close enough to see. They say the field still breathes at night, that if you press your ear to the ground, the soil hums like something trapped beneath it, not dead, not living, just waiting. And when the house burned down to its frame, when the crows lifted from the rooftops in a single black wave, the magnolia bloomed one last time, its petals ghost pale, slick with dew that wasn't dew at all. The flames had eaten everything but the roots. Even in the dark, the field shimmered with that faint, impossible glow, not from moonlight, for there was no moon, but from the breath of something that had been promised release and found itself denied. By dawn, the ash had settled into the shape of two bodies lying side by side, one still, one turned toward the other. As if in prayer or apology, the townsfolk came at sunrise, whispering behind handkerchiefs and rosary beads. They said the mistress had gone mad, that she'd locked herself in with the servant girl, that the screams were not hers alone. Some swore they saw shapes through the smoke, a woman dragging another toward the window, a shadow splitting into two and merging again like a reflection, trying to pull itself free. When they cleared the wreckage, the bodies weren't there. Only the magnolia tree untouched by flame, its roots twisting deep and wide like fingers clawing through memory. And around it the field had changed. The grass grew taller, denser, its tips stained rust red for weeks. No one would plow it, not after the oxen refused to step forward, their eyes rolling white, their legs sinking an inch too deep with every step. At dusk the crows returned, not in flocks this time, but in slow, deliberate pairs. They perched along the fence posts and watched the magnolia, their heads tilting in unison, as if listening for something beneath the soil. That night, the preacher's wife dreamed she was walking barefoot through the field. The ground was warm, too warm, and pulsed faintly under her feet. She heard laughter, not cruel, not kind, but knowing, rising up through the grass. When she looked down, the blades had turned into strands of hair, long and black, wrapping around her ankles. Pulling, she woke screaming, her sheets damp and streaked with mud. Though she hadn't left her bed, by the third day, whispers spread that the field was growing again, not outward but downward. The roots of the magnolia had begun to spread beneath the foundation stones of nearby houses. One man swore he heard something knocking in the cellar floorboards, a rhythmic, patient sound, like someone drumming from below. He filled the cracks with salt and ash, but by morning the wood was soft and wet, as though it had been breathing all night. Children dared each other to walk to the center of the field at twilight. None made it past the magnolia. They said the air grew heavy, sweet like rotten honey, and the shadows beneath the tree moved, even when the branches didn't. One boy claimed he heard singing, two voices, one sharp and one low, weaving in and out of each other like threads pulled through bone. He ran home crying, and by dawn his hair had turned half white. In the parish records, the names of the mistress and the servant were never written again, only a short note in the pastor's hand. The Lord took both, and the ground took what the Lord could not. But some say the truth was simpler. The house burned because it was meant to, because something older than either woman had decided the soil had been starved too long. Years passed and no one built on that land, yet travelers claimed they saw lights there, small and swaying, like lanterns carried by unseen hands, and if they stood too long near the magnolia, the air would thicken until breathing felt like swallowing another person's sigh. One summer, a farmer's daughter, bold and foolish, went to cut a branch for kindling. The moment her knife touched the bark, she heard a whisper in her ear. "Close and warm, don't," it said. "It's already done." She turned, but no one was there, only the rustling of grass that seemed to move against the wind. When she looked down, sap oozed from the cut, thick, dark and smelling faintly of iron. It dripped onto her hands, and for days afterward, everything she touched left a red print that wouldn't wash away. The preacher came once more, older now, trembling as he stood before the magnolia. He poured holy water at its base and muttered blessings, but the water steamed, hissing softly as though the ground itself rejected sanctity. He felt the earth pulse beneath his feet and swore he heard a voice, not blasphemous, not human, and whisper his own name from below. He ran before the roots could reach him, and yet sometimes on still nights when the magnolia blooms, the petals fall not white but a color closer to flesh, soft, veined, and faintly warm. If you gather them, and some have, they hum faintly in your palm, as though holding the last breath of something that refuses to rest. They say 2 voices remain beneath that tree, one pleading still, one whispering with calm finality. Neither has faded, and neither forgives. When the wind turns just right, their words drift across the field. Let go. It's already done. And though the house is gone, and the years have buried their names in moss and soil, the ground remembers the weight of both, mistress and servant, tangled together like roots that refuse to separate. Even now the field hums when the sun sinks low, and if you stand there long enough, you can feel the soil breathing against your boots, slow, steady, deliberate, as though waiting for the warmth of another body to join it.